Welcome to the Blue Mouse Knits. This is going to be a 3-part mini series on how to read your knitting and how to work increases in a raglan sweater while maintaining a stitch pattern. I'm going to go over 3 different stitches and how to maintain that stitch pattern while working increases. But the goal with this is to teach you how to read your knitting so you know what to work next without looking at your stitch pattern. I have a mock raglan neckline here. So this is as if you were knitting a top-down raglan sweater in the round. So to begin, we're going to do a make one right. I'm not really going to go over this much because this kind of assumes that you've done a basic raglan or you've done basic increases. I have tutorials for a make one right and a make one left. So if I'm working a waffle stitch, for example, now it's a 4-row repeat. Rows 1 and 2 are exactly the same. Rows 3 and 4 are exactly the same. It's up on screen here. So for row 1, we're going to work an increase and then repeat a knit 1, purl 2 until you have 1 stitch left, which you will knit, and then you'll work another increase. So I work a make one right, knit 1, purl 2 all the way across until you have 1 stitch left, which you will knit. So this is more of a setup. You don't really go into reading your knitting until the next row. So I end with a knit 1 and then I work an increase. The example is going to increase every row, but this process of learning to read your knitting to know what to work next will work regardless. It's time to learn how to read your knitting. So this essentially means that you can tell what stitch to work without having to look at your pattern or without having to refer to a stitch pattern. This is really, really helpful for increasing and decreasing, but just is a great thing to have in your toolkit as a knitter. If you're working with a slightly unfamiliar stitch pattern, I would suggest having a swatch on hand so you can refer to it. So here is a waffle stitch. You essentially have columns of knit stitches with broken up purl bumps in between. So the easiest thing I can think of to keep track of is your columns of knit stitches. So I know that there's 1 knit stitch followed by 2 purls on rows 1 and 2, and then rows 3 and 4 are very easy because they're just all knit rows. We did row 1 last time, so now we need to maintain a knit 1, purl 2 stitch pattern. If I look at my previous row, if I look into like the middle of it, I'll be able to tell that I have a knit stitch here from the previous row, 2 purls, knit, 2 purls, knit, and the first stitch was our increase from the last row. So what I like to do is go over a few stitches and count backwards and start my reference there. So I have a knit stitch right here, and on either side is 2 purl stitches. At least for rows 1 and 2, you want to work 2 purl stitches on either side of your knit column. Your knit columns will always be knit stitches. So this is my knit column right here. So this will be a knit, purl, purl, knit, which means our first stitch needs to be a purl because this knit stitch has to be next to purl stitches. Once it's a full repeat, it'll have 2 purl stitches on either side, but right now we only have 1 stitch on the other side of it, so this will be a purl by itself. We work our increase, and then we work a purl stitch, and then a knit 1, and then 2 purl stitches because our actual stitch pattern is a knit 1, purl 2. So you're just going to kind of keep maintaining that knit stitch as you go. So it's a knit 1, purl 2 until failure. Here's a full repeat of a knit 1, purl 2, and then I work a knit 1, and then a purl 1, and I don't have room for another purl 1, so we're okay to leave it there. If I look back on my row, I can tell that I've done it correctly because I have a knit column, and then 2 purl stitches, and then a knit column, and then 2 purl stitches. We don't have room for a full repeat on the start and end of each section. That's okay. So everything here looks okay in the middle. It's all matching what we're going for. So to end our section, we're going to do an increase, and then you work your raglan stitches. And that was row 2 of our waffle stitch pattern. So we've come to what will be row 3 of our waffle stitch. So here's our stitch pattern, just the basic stitch pattern here on the screen. So rows 3 and 4 are just plain knit rounds. You don't even have to look at what's next because they're all going to be knit for the next 2 rows. You get kind of a pass here, so you work your increase and knit across. So I've knit across and now I work another increase. So rows 3 and 4 are super, super simple. You're just going to do the same thing for row 4 where you work an increase and then knit across and then work an increase. So go ahead and do that and I'll show you where to go from there. I have now worked 4 total rows of my waffle stitch. So now the stitch pattern repeats itself. The benefit to being able to read your knitting is our row 1 reads repeat knit 1, purl 2 to 1 stitch knit 1. Depending on your increase rate, you most likely won't be able to just work the row directly across like that. So we have to look at our knitting and say, okay, well, where do we start? Just a refresher, this is what it's going to look like. Columns of knit stitches with clumps of purls in between them. The past 2 rows have all been knit rows. This doesn't really give us much information if we look at the previous row. But if I go a few stitches in and I find my purl stitches, there should be a knit column in between 2 purl stitches. So find one of those. So here's one right here. There's a knit column. And then on either side, we have 2 purl stitches. Our knit columns will always be knit columns in waffle stitch. We can follow this column up here and know that this will be a knit. And for this row, there should be 2 purl stitches on either side. So if this is a knit and I move towards my starting point, there should be knit, purl, purl, knit, purl, purl, knit, purl. So there's no room for the second purl, but we're going to work a purl 1 and then we get into our knit 1, purl 2 repeat. So remember that. We're still going to work our increase, and then remember I said we're going to work a purl stitch and then a knit 1. And now we can start to work our repeat of a knit 1, purl 2. So just work the knit 1, purl 2 until you run out of room. You may not have room for a full repeat, but if I'm keeping track, I look here and my knit column keeps going. There's no purl stitches in this column, but these have 2 purl rows here. And we know that these 2 are going to be purls up here as well, so it matches. So I've just worked a knit 1, purl 2. I only have 2 stitches left, so I'm going to work only part of that repeat. So knit 1 and then purl 1. We don't have room to work the next purl 1, but that's okay. Just go ahead and work your increase and your raglan stitches. So that was a repeat of a row 1, and you can see that we're maintaining the stitch pattern. Now that we've done another row 1 repeat, it's time to do a row 2 repeat. I still suggest keeping a tally next to each of these rows, even though rows 1 and 2 aren't exactly going to look like a knit 1, purl 2 repeat to 1, knit 1. It's not always going to look exactly like that. It will give you the structure for what you need to do because there are purl stitches in those rows, whereas in rows 3 and 4, there are no purl stitches. So it just kind of helps you to know what to do. Once you're good enough at reading your knitting, you'll know when it's time to switch because you'll know that you'll have 2 purl bumps here. So, oh, it must be time for 2 knit rows. So because we're doing a row 2, it's going to mimic row 1. So if this was a knit from row 1, then this needs to be a knit in row 2. If this is a purl in row 1, it needs to be a purl in row 2. So knit, purl, purl, knit, purl, purl, knit, purl, purl. So we work an increase and then purl 2, and then we can work our repeat of a knit 1, purl 2 until you run out of room. This is just kind of a basic guide on how to read your knitting, but a lot of times a raglan sweater will tell you increase at this rate while maintaining the stitch pattern, but it won't give you any guide on how to do that. This is just a general guide, but I just always suggest that you find one defining characteristic. For something like a seed stitch or a 1x1 rib, it's really easy because you're alternating every other stitch. With something like a waffle, we can find this column of knit stitches that will always be knit stitches, and then you can count from there whether the 2 stitches in between the knit columns are going to be purl or knit. So hopefully this is giving you a little bit of help while following a stitch pattern and increasing at the same time. If you found this video helpful, I have 2 more in this mini series. In total, I went over 1x1 rib, waffle stitch, and seed stitch. So you can find those linked below. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe for more. If you are looking for knitting patterns, I have an Etsy shop and a Ravelry shop. You can find those linked down below as well. Thanks for watching.